Welcome to the Dose of Optimism, where I talk to the optimists in healthcare. My name is Omkar Kulkarni, and I work at one of the world's best children's hospitals where I lead innovation. I started KidsX, which is a premier international startup accelerator for pediatric innovation. And over the years, I've met thousands of startups, investors, and innovators. Every one of them has a story, and every one of them is optimistic about the problems they're solving. On this podcast, you'll meet amazing people who will share their stories and what makes them optimistic about the future of healthcare. A little note before we get into this episode. This podcast is for informational purposes only. We are not offering medical advice, and we're not endorsing any products. Please talk to your own physician about your health or the health of your children. All right, let's get started. This episode is going to dive into the complex world of children with autism and neurodevelopmental disorders. There's so many unmet needs for parents, children, and clinicians related to this topic. Today, in this episode, we're going to scratch the surface with two innovations that are in the space, but I promise we will return to this topic in future episodes. First, we're going to talk about an innovation to help families who are concerned that their young children may have autism, to get answers and perhaps treatment earlier. Because this is such a complex area, we're going to talk to two physicians about this innovation. First, a pediatrician, and then a neurologist. Dr. Colleen Kraft is a pediatrician. She's a colleague of mine at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. She's the past president of the American Academy of Pediatrics. She's known for her groundbreaking work in pediatric accountable care, evaluating the efficacy of new digital health care models in pediatrics and advocating for children's rights globally. In fact, when I interviewed her for this episode, she was halfway around the world in Uzbekistan. I then speak with Dr. Sharief Taraman, a pediatric neurologist, a clinical informaticist, and the CEO of Cognoa, a company pioneering AI solutions for early diagnosis and treatment of neurodevelopmental disorders. He's also division chief of pediatric neurology at Rady Children's, and he's an OG thought leader in applying AI, augmented reality, and digital therapeutics to improve outcomes for children.
The American Academy of Pediatrics has really had a push on developmental screening. So rather than just waiting till there's a problem, we are proactive in looking at what children are doing in terms of speech, gross motor, fine motor, personal social development. And this is really making pediatricians much more aware of development and normal development and some developmental differences that we see in kids. And so the patterns of autism, where you are looking at problems with social communication, you're looking at problems with nonverbal cues and not maintaining or developing relationships and repetitive movements, are things that we are beginning to really look at and note very early, much earlier in our patients because we're following them carefully and we've got an eye on development.
How early in childhood do you start developmental screening?
There are some children who you are pretty concerned about autism as early as 12 months. The MCHAT, which is the screening tool, is between 18 months and 24 months. And we pick up a lot of kids where we are concerned about autism at 18 months. So we're picking up the concern earlier and earlier. The problem is that the old paradigm was that you did the screening and then you sent them to a specialist for diagnosis. And there are not enough specialists. In fact, in our country last year, we only had 31 people who applied for developmental behavioral pediatric specialty programs. We were fortunate at CHLA to match two really wonderful people, but that pool of specialists is actually very low, and it has become incumbent on primary care physicians to learn how to diagnose kids with autism and learn how to manage these kids after that diagnosis.
As a result, I imagine the wait list can be very long to see a specialist. How long does it take on average?
Some of the wait lists in places are up to 3 years. They are generally 9 to 12 months in our area here. But the good thing is that pediatricians, general pediatricians, and in our training and with our enhanced developmental training, we can actually diagnose these kids. And to have tools that are very accurate in helping us do that is something amazing and really something game changing in terms of getting kids with developmental disabilities diagnosed earlier and into treatment earlier.
You work with a company called Cognoa that is doing innovative work in this space. How would you describe their solution and how does it apply here?
Well, the scenario would be this. You see a child, and pediatricians see kids since they were babies. So we have a longitudinal view of this child's development. But you see this child at 18 months, and you're concerned about their language or some behaviors at 18 months, where the family answers some questions about their child's development. You, as their doctor, can answer a number of different questions because you know this child's development. And then the family takes 2 videos, 90-second videos of their child face to face so we can look at eye contact, we can look at language, and then in a play environment so you can look to see if that child has repetitive behaviors or if they're playing with toys in a weird way. The algorithm will give you a report looking that really is very sensitive and specific for whether that child has autism, whether they do not have autism, or if they are in an indeterminate category, which for the scientist says that there's not enough data to call it positive or negative. For a pediatrician, it says this kid has something. We got to figure out what it is. But it also gives you in the report some very actionable data. There are challenge scores. And when you look at that child who is scored intermediate or indeterminate and that they're having problems with speech or with joint attention or with sensory, you know right away as a pediatrician that your next step is getting that child to speech therapy or occupational therapy. It's getting them into early intervention or regional center, or it's getting them into early childhood special education through the schools. So that child that might have waited for a year on a waiting list to see a specialist now has either a diagnosis of autism, they don't have autism, or you've got some actionable information where you can start to manage that kid's disability.
Why is earlier intervention important, especially for this population?
A child's brain is rapidly growing between the ages of 0 and 6, and even more so between 0 and 3. So, every time that you can get a child diagnosed early and start to get them treated early, then you're actually making the right types of neural connections that are going to help that child far beyond the time that they are with you as your patient.
Dr. Taraman, from a neurologist perspective, what brought you to develop Canvas DX?
The neurodevelopmental disorders are on the rise, and autism specifically, if we look at the number of kids that are getting diagnosed with autism, this has been increasing steadily ever since we started tracking it. What we do know is that in general, medicine has this bad habit of lumping lots of things into something and then calling that maybe autism or calling that Alzheimer's or calling it some condition. In reality, we have this ability to actually think about conditions or disorders or diseases in a more personalized approach and in a higher dimensional order. And when we start doing that, I think that actually helps us dissect out and see where these many causes for autism, as an example, where we can actually intervene. So the national news was a lot of about leucovorin as a potential treatment for autism. And if you really look at it, there's a subset of kids that honestly, they really respond really well to leucovorin. But the question is, who are those kids and how do we characterize them? And so, what the technology does is it allows for an expanded pool of clinicians to make the diagnosis. And this is a good theme in AI, which is can you upskill your workforce? The second thing is, can you make your workforce more efficient? What we're trying to do with Canvas DX is also help the specialists be more efficient because normally, one of the neuropsychologists that we were working with, he's like, if I'm working really hard, maybe I can see a kid or two a day. But with Canvas DX, I can see 8 kids a day. And so now you've suddenly increased your ability for the specialist to see more kids and then again move that to the primary care space. And then in that, we are getting high dimensional phenotypic data that I hope to partner with people who are looking at etiologies.
So, what does a tool look like today to a family, to a physician? What's the experience look like? Walk us through it.
So the parents get a text message and an email with an access code, and they download an app off the App Store. It's available in English and Spanish on Android and iOS. And the Android part is really important because we want to make sure we have ability for everybody to really access this technology as much as possible. They answer some questions. They upload home videos of their child. Those videos are scored currently by human beings who are what we call video analysts. They're master's level and above PT, OT, speech therapist types who have been working in the field, and they annotate those videos. And then there's a brief question set for the clinician. And then those three inputs are combined in an algorithm hosted in a HIPAA secure cloud. That's how the way of the world works. And then you get a answer if we can give you an answer with a high degree of confidence. So our current negative predictive value is 97%. Our current positive predictive value is 95%. And we can give a determinate answer for about 78% of the cases. And the reason that we don't give an answer for everybody is because obviously this is a complex neurodevelopmental disorder. And even specialist clinicians will disagree on the diagnosis if they're blinded somewhere between 20 and 30% of the time. We don't want to give false positive and false negatives, but for every child, we'll give a complete developmental assessment. And then ultimately, the clinician has to confirm whether it's autism or not, or some other neurodevelopmental disorder.
Your point is that in those early years, every week matters, every month matters, right? So the sooner you're able to start treatment or therapy, you're creating value because you're moving up the stream in terms of how quickly you can get treatment.
Yeah. And I think actually one of the things that's really interesting is I don't think people understand this. So if I like to say I have obsessive compulsive traits, but I don't have obsessive compulsive disorder because it doesn't create dysfunction in my daily life. In the same way, there are these kind of two concepts of autism and autism as a disorder. So if my autistic features are well utilized, that can be like a superpower. But when they're causing dysfunction in my life, then it becomes autism as a disorder. We know that 37% at least of kids with autism who received early intervention, by the time they hit early elementary, no longer meet criteria for autism as a disorder if they got early intervention. We also looked at almost 9,000 patients' claims data. And for every month there's a delay in a diagnosis of autism, it costs a payer about $331 per month. If we take an average wait of 6 months, you're talking about almost $2,000 in excess spend on the health plan. So when we think about quintuple aim, which is patient satisfaction, better outcomes, cost improvement, helping the clinicians so we're not burned out and quitting our jobs, all of those fit with this. And I think this is the beauty of digital health and innovation within the pediatric space, which honestly, as you know, Omkar, and are a great champion for this, we need more innovations in pediatrics. And if we're not invested in our children, then what are we doing as a society?
Well said. Thank you so much for all that you've been doing for decades now, and looking forward to seeing how this innovation continues to create impact across the country.
Thank you, and keep up the good work as well.
And now a thank you to our generous sponsors.
All right, we want to thank our sponsors for A Dose of Optimism. Our first sponsor is Nabla. Nabla, this will help keep us practicing longer. For 85,000 clinicians and counting, Nabla is the key to better balance. With real-time notes and dictation in one platform, clinicians are saving hours on documentation time and strengthening patient satisfaction. Learn more on nabla.com. And to Mercury Bank, online business banking for startups and small businesses. Go to Mercury Bank for powerful banking, simplified finances. And finally, we want to thank our presenting sponsor, KidsX. KidsX is a global ecosystem of pediatric innovators anchored by a consortium of the leading children's hospitals motivated to accelerate health innovation and transform care in pediatrics. We've talked about an innovative approach to early screening and detection of autism. Now, let's talk to Vijay Ravindran about his innovation to help children who have been diagnosed with autism. Vijay is a lifelong tech entrepreneur whose journey spans Amazon, the Washington Post, and now virtual reality therapy. He's the co-founder of Floreo, and his story will be sure to inspire you. Vijay, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us all about Floreo and what problem you're solving and how the product works.
Absolutely. Floreo is a virtual reality therapy system with immersive, clinically designed content focused on improving social and life skills for the neurodiverse.
So we've got children that are diagnosed with autism. What do they use it for? Is it the doctor that uses it? Walk us through the example of how this technology is used.
So the Floreo system starts with a virtual reality headset and a companion application that allows a supervising adult, who could be a therapist, a parent, or a special educator, to select lessons and then be able to operate delivering that content to the VR headset of the neurodiverse child. And so there's a large catalog of lessons, over 200, that isolate different skills that are important to development. So anything from the ability to imitate or understanding a pointing gesture, a nonverbal communication, to conversational skills, social skills in the school, all the way to safety areas if you're working with adults, to job skills and independent living. We offer the product today in several different manners. We have our largest population of users, autism therapy clinics. Clinicians can decide to use Floreo as the tool or instrument for helping teach a specific skill and add that to the treatment plan, and then have the technicians that work with the child most closely. And this is usually happening in the context of applied behavioral analysis, or ABA style autism therapy, though we do work with speech and occupational therapists as well. Second, in school districts, they often employ therapists, speech therapists, ABA therapists, occupational therapists, and you have master's level teachers who work with special education populations. And so the Floreo system is also used in that context. And one of the interesting things about autism is the fact that it's had a history both as a medical diagnosis and as a learning disability. And so it is one of these conditions where school districts are essentially healthcare providers in all but MPI number. And they're basically delivering service that often significantly overlaps with what the therapy clinics are doing. So our same product is being used in both contexts. And then finally, parents can access the system directly and use it at home. They can do that through cash pay on the website, but we also have Medicaid waiver reimbursements in several states. And so families working with their service coordinators are able to access a fully reimbursed version, and in many cases, hardware as well.
That's great. I'm glad it's accessible to so many families. So it seems like you're leveraging exposure therapy to a certain degree, where you're exposing the child or the patient to potential scenarios in which they would be exposed in a real setting, but you're doing it through virtual reality. And then with the therapist who's there with them, they're able to learn and develop and figure out how to manage those skills. Is that generally how it works?
You can think of it as a form of exposure therapy. We are creating simulations of situations that the therapist, using whatever protocol they use, because they might be coming at it from a speech therapy context or an applied behavioral analysis context, or even being used by a psychotherapist who might be using CBT principles. We create scenes where children are able to practice skills, and we take advantage of this immersive environment to create situations that they're able to engage with, because it's fun and animated and cartoony if it's for younger kids. If it's for older kids and young adults, it's realistic and is able to convey something that might be very difficult to convey in a therapist office.
So, Vijay, give us an example of a scenario in which this would work.
I think the best example I like to give is crossing the street safely. It's a skill that is a real challenge for neurodiverse kids. It's a skill that, if you get wrong, can be catastrophic. So doing it wrong in the real world, really bad. You definitely want to get it right. And in VR, we can do something that you just can't do in a therapist office or in the home. We can show car traffic. We can validate that the child is learning the instincts of looking both ways before crossing the street. We can identify where the walk button is. We can familiarize the child with the sound that the walk sign makes. And all of those things can be put together and practiced until the supervising adult feels safe about the child's ability to then do that in the real world.
That's a great example. So, if the child puts on the headset and they are immersed into a world where they're actually crossing the street, there's sounds, there's sights, everything, but they're safely in their clinic, the doctor's office. And so now they can practice safely crossing the street, get feedback or help from their therapist. This is very different than what's traditionally done.
So they're using stuffies or matchbox cars, or they're trying to convey it to often a child that's already having trouble with imaginative play and some of these skills. And so to be able to do it in VR and create something that is closer to reality than flashcards or toys can be beneficial.
What's another example?
We have so many lessons, but we have a lesson on law enforcement encounters. The big fear factor in minority communities is you spend all this time trying to help a neurodiverse child pick up social skills, but they're walking to school or they're using public transportation to get somewhere. It can be scary to then think about, can this child navigate a law enforcement encounter? And so we worked with the Philadelphia Police Department under NIH Fast Track Grant with Children's Hospital Philadelphia and developed lessons where the child is able to practice having an officer glowering at you and asking standard questions just like they would on the street. We work with the police department directly to get the dialogue right. Can be intimidating to be able to go through that scenario and feel comfortable and then be able to navigate introducing yourself, saying why you're here, what your name is, where you live. It's incredibly important practice that could hopefully help if that encounter happens. We know this population had the higher rate of law enforcement encounters in general child population, so it's really beneficial. Another lesson we just introduced, we just launched a lesson on preparing you for a digital texting world and identifying potentially bad bullying or abusive behaviors around being groomed. So again, another big concern of this community is as neurodiverse kids become teenagers, they are very vulnerable to some of the digital threats that are out there. And being able to practice, and in this case, very much from an exposure sense, it can be a bit hair-raising to hear. And so we simulate holding your phone and getting these texts, and you actually feel the stress of getting these messages. And then we actually help them practice talking to their parent and being able to go to an authority figure for help. And so we use that in several cases. But by and large, the most popular part of the system today with elementary school kids is around conversational skill building, making friends. So inviting a friend to sit at the lunch table next to you. So just being able to rehearse some of the back and forth exchanges that occur in everyday settings so that they become more and more fluent in navigating these little short interchanges that end up being critical to making friends and navigating your day and feeling good about yourself is important.
So as a parent, I've got 3 kids that are in that elementary school age. They are neurotypical, but I feel like a technology like this could even help them. I mean, parenting where you're able to create a immersive scenario and give real feedback and see how they do. It's just fascinating. What kind of impacts have you been tracking, outcome metrics?
I think the product can have broad applicability, and it's in keeping with the long tradition of technologies focused on what can seem like narrow communities, then being lifted and applied more broadly, from hearing aids to Bluetooth to the automated doors at grocery stores to curb cutouts. There's a very long list of examples where when you serve a population well and innovate on their behalf, that often the technologies end up being more generalizable and broadly. And I think we can follow in that tradition. But to give you some examples in the field and how it's changed lives, the first story from one of our very earliest customers was a child who had unfortunately been hit by a car when he was 2 or 3 years old. And the child had been unwilling to travel in a car with their family since. And at this point, the child was like 7 or 8. And so you can imagine how disruptive that is to the family. They have to basically fight to put the child in a car anymore because of this accident that happened in a parking lot. And so the school used Floreo to familiarize the child with cars and just being closer to cars. And the end result was they were able to build that familiarity that led to the child being able to travel with their family once again. And so it was a huge breakthrough. And it was one of the first times we had seen the system in action. I think we've been able to see countless other stories. I was at a school in Nevada that's using Floreo, and the children wanted to meet me who were using the product. This was in a 6th grade classroom, and they all had practiced their greetings, and the teachers had incorporated learning how to shake hands as part of introducing themselves. And they basically all fluently did this skill that they had learned in the system. The teachers then shared that this had been noticed throughout the school, that they had learned the skill all of a sudden. And suddenly in the mainstream classroom, they were getting feedback saying, like, what happened here? And it was a very short amount of time they picked up a skill thanks to the lesson.
Wow. you can hear the impact through all these stories that you're bringing up. So thank you for sharing. Sounds like this is used both elementary, middle, and high school.
Yeah. So today we offer the product as a wellness offering, as a tool in clinics, in schools, and directly to parents. That version is for 4 and above. And then we have a regulated version that's in pivotal trial, completing in November, and we'll be submitting to the FDA. The target label for that will be between 5 and 18 years old.
Vijay, what brought you to build and create this innovative product? It's quite different than so many other things on the market. I'm curious what inspired you and how you came up with this.
Absolutely. As you know, but some of your listeners might not, that I have a tech background. I was an early engineer at Amazon, joining in 98, and was an executive at the Washington Post when my son was diagnosed on the spectrum. He was 2. He's been through thousands of hours of therapy to help him with social and communication needs. When he was 6 years old, now 9 years ago, he saw me using a virtual reality headset, the developer kit for the Oculus, or now MetaQuest at the time, and spent 30 minutes in VR and had this amazing experience where he started pretend playing in a new way with his toys after spending 30 minutes in VR. It was a light bulb moment for me when I saw that development. I think as parents of neurodiverse kids, we're often looking for those milestones, and what neurotypical parents take for granted because they just happen so naturally. You're just fighting rung to rung to climb the ladder. So here was this really awesome moment. It inspired the idea that virtual reality could be a next generation medium for kids like him. The company started the Basement Project in 2016. I self-funded the company for the first year and a half, brought in an engineer, started consulting with a developmental pediatrician and a therapist to create that minimum viable product and start to get the company off the ground.
I often say that some of the best innovators are parents looking to solve problems for their children, and it's a great example of that. So thank you for sharing. Vijay, amazing work, and thank you for joining us. I appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thank you for joining us for your dose of optimism. Make sure to check out our show notes to get more information about our guests and the work they're doing. Visit our podcast page on the KidsX website to join our podcast community and to learn more about pediatric innovation. Thank you to our sponsors and to our presenting partner, KidsX. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and remember, it takes a village to make sure our kids grow into healthy adults. So volunteer at your local library, help out at the community center, and thank your crossing guard. And if you're so inspired, donate to your local children's hospital. All right, see you next time.